everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Today, Pat and I are going to be talking about some recent games that we played, the lead up to those games, some of the memorable moments that we had during those games, as well as testing out new toys that Pat's going to tell you all about, and sort of all points in between. So a bit of a hodgepodge, but we've taken a bit of a break for a couple of weeks. We're happy to get back into it. Well, I mean, it is what it is, right? So we still enjoy doing these, and we're going to keep doing them. So there you go. So this was, I think it was your first game of the season, if I'm not mistaken, when we played a couple weeks ago, right?
Yeah. I sort of ceased to exist for June and a substantial amount of July.
Yeah.
Teacher life. But yeah, no, it was really good to be back out. It was a cool game. I mean, obviously, like, your first game in a while is always going to be a good game, I think. Mm-hmm. Unless you
I would agree.
Break your face.
Yeah.
But it was additionally a good game because, like, we had a pretty good variety of players out. We had a bunch of newer players who were, visibly trying to figure out how the sport works. A bunch of fairly veteran players, and then, some grizzled old monsters like myself and Phil.
Yeah. And it was interesting because, before we get into the day of, I think we had several things that we wanted to sort of get squared away ahead of the game. So one of the things that I wanted to do was to go out in particular and really take the time necessary to zero in the red dot on my rifle, something that I hadn't done really in a while, and something I'm going to have to do again as we do a couple of upgrades in the weeks to come. But
tinkering never ends.
I mean, it is what it is. And I think you had some new toys that you wanted to check out and do much the same, right? Make sure that everything is sort of copacetic and working the way that you want to. But I think one of the things I wanted to start on is really emphasizing for everybody who's listening, there is huge benefit to taking the time to go out and zeroing your rifle and understanding what your holds are at a known distance. So when we went out with a target that had, let's call it 10-inch wide diameter circle that we had spray painted on it. But I went out with a measuring tape so that we could mark off 50, 100, 150, and 200 feet. So that, more or less, it wasn't scientifically accurate, but it was close enough that when we were, yeah, exactly. You're standing about 150 feet. Could it have been 147 or 152? Yeah, probably. But really, for what we're talking, our purposes, really not that important. But it's really important. So we were able to dial in our hop-ups and make sure everything was, at least in my case, for sure, flying with the right profile that I'm looking for. And that at 150, I didn't have any hold. So I put my dot on the target at 150, and I was getting hits more or less within that area, which it turns out that there's some other issues on the go, but that's beside the point.
And the target area, we were using sort of, as Phil said, a 10-inch diameter circle, but that gives you, if you can hit that, 2 shots in 3, shall we say, at 150, then
that's loads. Yeah.
Yeah. You're hitting a guy my size 3 shots in 3. Probably 4 or 5 shots in 3,
Totally. And so at the time, I'm looking at this going oh, well, it's not super, it's not super accurate, but I think it behooves you to try it. Once you go out to the field and, you recognize that the targets that you're shooting at are probably bigger in many cases than the target you're shooting at that you've set up, number one. And the guys on the Discord rib me a lot for shooting a lot. And I mean, it's a bit of a meme now, and I make jokes about it myself.
It has become a Storm Riders meme.
Well, yeah. I will say, though, that I shot considerably less ammunition as a result of properly dialing in my rifle, both when we played a few weeks ago and when I played last Saturday. Considerably less. Because I was getting good effect on target with, 4 or 5 rounds at longer ranges. And I also had a good concept of I'm not going to be very effective any further back than I am right now. So rather than try and force it and try and like arc my shots or lob them in or whatever, just move up 2 pieces of cover. So now instead of being 190 feet away, oh, well, now I'm 170 feet away, 150 feet, or even closer than that, right? I will say, though, as a sort of a direct corollary to that, on when I played on Saturday, there were times where I was shooting, I was engaging a target, I was shooting at Matt, actually, and I couldn't hit him. I was like, I had my dot on target and I couldn't hit him. And when we got back to the spawn, he told me, oh yeah, all of your BBs were flying over my head. And when I stopped and I thought about it, I was like, oh, well, that's because he's actually much closer than I thought he was. He probably was only, 25, let's say 30 feet away, 10 meters away, something like that. And at that range, my BBs were not hitting the red dot. They were actually completely overhopping, because that's not the flight profile that I gave my BBs on purpose, right? I gave them the flight profile where they fly up, and then at the end they have that little curve, but right up front, I actually needed to compensate the other way, hold down instead of hold up or hold on, right?
And there's that moment inevitably where you're like, oh right, I have set this up to do something that's a little different than what I had it set up previously to do. And here we are with that.
Yeah, and you don't really recognize that until you hit the field. And to be fair, and when I think about it to myself, when I'm on the flat range being like, oh yeah, I want to have no hold at 150, and then I go and I play at frontline, and I'm like, how often am I engaging targets that are 150 or 200 versus how often am I engaging targets that are 100 or less?
So does that mean you're going to try to set for no hold at 100 this time?
Yeah, exactly. Right. That's the lesson learned here. It's like, it makes more sense for me, given the applications that we're using, to have no hold at 100 and no hold at 50, then no hold at 100, no hold at 150, but I have to hold under at 50 or less, because that happens a lot more frequently. And when we get talking about like the games and stuff, we can go into it. But all this to say, for a guy who, according to the memes, shoots, way more ammo than is really necessary, having that red dot properly sighted in to understand, like, what do I need to do here to get a round or 2 rounds on target at this range makes a huge difference, right? Yeah, I don't need to shoot 5 or 6 BBs. I can only shoot 3, and I see the hand go up, and I'm like, all right, well, that's good then, right?
I mean, it turns out that, yeah, like, if your reticle you're dropping on your target is where your BBs are actually going, that's a big advantage to getting rounds on target. And it's, okay, yeah, that's obvious, Pat and Phil, but like, we often, as airsofters especially, like, I mean, I said it earlier myself, right? Good enough for airsoft. So how much effort do you necessarily put into zeroing your gear, right? Do you just toss the red dot on and you figure it out on the field? And from, the same game setup, like, I took my my new toys out to play around. So the day that we went to test guns, I had received and installed my Polar Star Fusion engine into my IAR, replacing the Kythera. And so I was very excited. We ran off and took them out to do testing, and we didn't bring a chronograph. So I zeroed my scope using that target at, I think, about 150, 175 feet. And it was working very, very well, and we were really, like, super duper impressed. And then I got home.
I remember being like, man, your BBs are like, they're trucking, like they're very zippy. Now, understandably, like, I'm shooting 1.3 joules, so my basis of comparison was like, oh, they're definitely faster than mine, and I expect that for sure. Were they under the limit? Both of us at the time were like, yeah, we might be a little bit over the limit or whatever. But they were definitely flying. And they were, I mean, aside from the fact that they were zipping, like, they were also, very accurate, which was nice.
Totally. And I think this demonstrates pretty well the flaw in going like, oh yeah, we can eyeball the velocity of these. We've played airsoft for a really long time, because you see people saying stuff like that. So it turns out that the Fusion engine needs about 60 psi of air pressure to match the performance of the Kythera's 110. So I was shooting about 2.6 joules while we were doing that testing. And then I went home and chronographed it and went,
yeah, it's not quite double field limits, but I mean, it's up there.
Yeah, right. Like, So I turned that down and then went and played at the game and did sort of some like very light tuning on my very nice scope. And during the games was like, yeah, I'm having to correct a whole bunch, but Frontline is not, practically speaking, an optimal place to try to zero a scope. They don't have anywhere that's marked off in long enough increments to make it useful for what that rifle can now perform at. And, you know, I was there to play games, so like I didn't worry about it too much. But
And
I definitely,
it was windier on the day up than it was when we were out zeroing, right?
Yep.
Which is always a bit of a crapshoot in Newfoundland, but I mean,
what can you do?
that's the weather for you. Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a thing that I need to address the next time I go to test guns, which will be pretty soon. So that being said, you know, how did I like the Fusion engine relative to the Kythera? Well, I definitely, you know, I have to start by acknowledging, because any sensible person would, that it costs a little under 3 times as much in Canadian dollars. Like, I bought them from the same retailer a year apart, and the price difference is definitely meaty. That being said, one of the things I am learning about the HPA setup stuff in general, as I play with it, is that it is pretty forgiving. You know, the Kythera was really fiddly to get installed completely correctly, because the way it manipulates, the way you manipulate the trigger pull on the Kythera is very fiddly, right? It's very, very small metering screws, and at the time I didn't know there were multiple strengths of Loctite, and so that was problematic. It definitely complicated my life in terms of messing around with it.
And it was your first kick out the can too. Like, it was really your first foray into
Totally.
that whole world, right?
The Fusion engine, by comparison, you know, putting in the amped IGL, so the integrated grip line, which I definitely recommend if you're doing HPA stuff. They're $40 and they're so much more durable than their counterparts that there's almost no contest for the price. If you're buying a $400 airsoft engine for your HPA gun, like, again, $40 doesn't seem like it's a thing you should be balking at this point. You know, if you're, you know, looking at it and going, oh, well, that's, you know, the $40 is the problem. I've questions. Anyway, my snark notwithstanding, they're really, really good. Both of the ones that I've gotten have been kind of a nuisance to install. The one for the Kythera didn't come with a wrench, and I would have liked it to. And then ironically, the one for the Fusion engine did come with a wrench, and I ended up using a better tool that I had, which was still a wrench, just a different variety, and one better, more robust than the one they ship with them. That being said, that was super easy. It all comes apart really tidily. It goes back together really tidily. And one of the things I definitely have to say, after spending a reasonably ridiculous amount of hours working on AEGs, trying to get them to perform in specific ways, the fact that you can take, you know, a programmable airsoft gun that's using a HPA setup and tell it all the things you want it to do and manipulate them on a little fire control unit really, really easily is brilliant. You know, just going, oh yeah, this setting, if my mags aren't feeding, I lower this setting and it should fix that, is brilliant. The amount of messing around to get a specific performance metric, and the amount of flexibility to create performance metrics without altering any of the parts is really, really cool to me. And then knowing also that, yeah, you can go and alter the parts is also like, oh, okay. So it is kind of a new area of playing around with airsoft stuff and seeing what kind of performance metrics I can get out of it. I definitely think there's an argument at this point for taking a look at what you want your gun to do and going, oh, maybe HPA does have value for that. It's also pretty fun, admittedly, to be able to have full auto on the IAR. I don't use full auto in games ever, really. So, like, it's not a feature that I really, quote unquote, needed. But having it there is fun. And being able to set the rate of fire to the rate of fire that a Polar Star can do is definitely giggle worthy. I did go back and tune it back down. It's shooting a very moderate, especially for HPA, muzzle or number of rounds per second on auto, because I don't want to be ruining people's day. But it is definitely pretty satisfying. Just from a tech point of view, just like, ooh, that's a fun noise.
And I think, one of the things we talked about, and I mean, I'm not really interested in the HPA setups, mostly because, well, firstly, budget, I had, so do I get an HPA or do I get my septic tank pumped, right? Like, that's the kind of conversations I'm having right now. But there is this place where, and we were talking about this because when we were tuning the guns, it's like, well, a 110 spring shoots 1.3 to 1.4 joules, and then a 120 spring shoots 1.6 to, whatever. And so really, if I want a 120, well, then I have to either have like a DMR or whatever for our field, or I have to just do a crappy enough job on the air seal that it comes in under 1.6 joules, which is not ideal.
And if you do that, you're like, well, okay, so now my consistency is shot. What was the point of this?
Yeah.
Right.
Or I get a 120 and then I start, making some sort of like custom modifications to the spring or whatever. Or I get a 110 and do similar, cut off rings or do all kinds of crates. And I mean, yes, you certainly can do that. Some of the guys of the field were saying, oh yeah, you can do that. And then, once the spring wears, you replace it with this thing and you do that thing. And I'm like, that's a whole lot of messing around, which quite frankly is not my speed. Like, I really want to make sure that it works basically as well as we can. And so consequently, if you have an HPA setup, you do have a bit more flexibility. You want it to shoot 1.55, great. You can just tune the air and get it set up so that it's shooting exactly that, and it gives you, you can skirt the line if that's what you're trying to do, which is not really what I'm trying to do. I'm more like, I would like a little bit more range, a little bit more consistency, but ultimately, that HPA gives you that flexibility, which you don't really have in the same, definitely not as easily on the AG side.
Definitely. And like, I'm not running at the limit for a gun that has full auto options for our field, because I don't see any point in doing so. Yes, okay, so I can crank the muzzle velocity and get another 50 feet out of my rifle. Probably not even that, given where the field limits actually are. And like, practically speaking, and this is one of the things I will say, like, man, oh man, does that thing shoot consistently. It's very, very clean to shoot. I got a lot of kills at ranges that would have been pushing the performance metrics, I think, on my non-HPA stuff. I do also think it's a little nicer than the Kythera. It has the sort of drawback of, like, the Kythera is mechanical, so it's machined consistency, and it's definitely very, very good consistency, but where the Fusion engine is just, a drop-in engine inside of a mech box, I think it lines up a little better. Mm-hmm. And like, you can shimmy your gearbox around and make a Kythera work as well. But I'm definitely in a place in my life where, like, partly I did buy this just because it was a new toy and I wanted to play with it uncategorically. But I think that there's definitely value in, like, limited messing around for me with installation, and more messing around with features and settings and trying to get it to perform exactly how I want without, or in ways that aren't like trying to shim a gearbox inside of a physical gun body.
And I mean, it's interesting. Now, you brought it up, so we can go into it a little bit. I think, with the games that we played when you showed up to the field and onwards, like, one of the games we played was like a village defense game, or like a 2-story defense game. Which, the way that we typically, was it village or was it just a 2-story? I can't remember.
We were defending just the old 2.
Just the old 2-story. So the way that works for us is that the defenders have to stay in the building or in the first row of cover on the outside of the building, and the attackers just need to get inside. But it's a 2-story structure, hence the name, the old 2-story, and it's the old 2-story because it's the first one. They built a second one, and that's the new 2-story, right? That's just nomenclature. But point is
complicated, right?
So. Yeah, but the thing is, when you get onto the 2-story, if you get to the second story, from the windows up there, I mean, you have probably some of the longest fire lanes that you're gonna have at the frontline field, with potentially the exception of like the road field from one end to the other. So from up there, you can be shooting at ranges of up to like 250 feet, maybe, if you're shooting from there all the way to the back of the D-Day field or something like that, like full field kind of deal. But for the purpose of this game, like, you're engaging targets probably ranges of like 150 to closer, right? So from your perspective, you were up there, right? So that's what you were doing for most of that game. So you got to test out your brand new Polar Star, and that set up pretty, I mean, no, I wouldn't say it's a stress test by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly you really got to try it out in a target-rich environment, let's call it.
Yeah, and I definitely got to play with it in a constructive way there, right? So I guess my takeaway from that is, goddamn, like, no issue hitting anyone at any range, sort of within the village field or the pushed back space behind it that were in play. Basically, if I could see you, I could hit you. And I always take it as a compliment when partway through the game, the enemy team adjusts their plan to, we are just going to put every gun on the windows that Pat has been shooting from until he is no longer there, because we can't make progress while he is.
Yeah.
And that's sort of, when you're defending structures and bringing either a DMR kind of rifle or an LMG kind of rifle, you can expect to have that experience. So it's one of those things where I think people got work done because there was a lot of focus on me for some parts of the game, but there were also parts of the game where I was just like, they're not firing at me, so I'm just going to indiscriminately remove players from the field.
Yeah, and I mean, it really showcases, especially like we always think of defense games where it's like, oh, man, like defending is tough. And it is, right? Like, especially if it's a structure that you cannot leave. Like, for me, my ideal way of defending a structure is creating concentric rings on the outside and stop the attackers from getting anywhere close to it. But in this game mode in particular, they're like, no, you can't do that. You have to stay within the confines.
Creating defensive rings and going and getting the people who are coming to attack you.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can't do that in this case. So just having the ability, to your point, of being that person who they have to focus their fire, or at least have to coordinate, keeping you suppressed and, advancing. And of course, in the typical skirmish type of game that we were playing at that time, even we had, I don't know how many, we had 20 people or 25 people or something like that. There's not enough it was like the six of us on like
at least
18.
Yeah, somewhere
something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say like 15, 19 people, somewhere there.
And like, you don't have that coordination. So that means that the second they stop shooting at you, or anyone, but I mean you in particular with your advantage, you immediately punish that, right? Because it would be one thing if it was like a renter with a stock gun and no optic or whatever up there, but you've got a guy with a precision tuned HPA gun with a magnified optic, and we've always said that magnified optics aren't necessary or the bee's knees for airsoft, but it certainly doesn't hurt in a situation where you have full visibility, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, one of the things that I definitely found was, so I was running the optic on a 2.5 magnification, and like I've used for years a 2.5x airsoft optic on a whole bunch of platforms, including very accurized AEGs, like really high and well-tuned AEGs. And I have Lexan on the front of my my optic to protect it, so it's not actually as crisp as it was before I put that on. And the amount of difference in eye relief, in ease and rapidity of target acquisition is ludicrous.
I mean, it was also 6 times the price, so let's let's put that down there.
And the funny thing is, it wasn't. It was 2. Right, like the airsoft optic but it's relevant, right? Like the airsoft optic I was using was a $200 Elcan Spectre Repro, and I think it's worth commenting on the fact that the price difference for a $400 real steel optic, which is pretty low end for a real steel optic, honestly, is ridiculous. And like part of that is, am I satisfied with my purchase? Is it improving my my fun? Totally.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm building or operating a rifle that's designed to benefit from it. So like I have sort of the right part working with the right part. But yeah, just the fact that for even accounting for the fact that it wasn't as zeroed as I would like it to be while I was up there, if I dropped the reticle on someone, they were out.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I had time to get my head out the window and take a shot, then the enemy team was down a player until a player respawned. So like in practical terms, like I was the first player out during that game on our team, because my God, did they not like me? And that was
Yeah.
strategically, tactically sound. Like that was the right play. But and I'm sure there are players who don't consider that it feels good. But like, if I am putting enough pressure on the enemy team that they have decided that objective A is taking me out of the game and are probably right to do so, I'm definitely helping my team, right?
Totally. And I mean, Steph and I were on the bottom floor and we were doing work and we were able to push ourselves into positions that were probably a bit more unsafe, a bit more unorthodox, let's say, in order to make shots, because we knew that they weren't looking at us, they were looking at you.
Because you guys can
right?
hear the fire hitting the top floor and be like,
well, yeah,
I guess Pat's distracting them.
and we can hear your gun going off and all this kind of stuff. Big boy rules, like we're paying attention to the situation, right? Situational awareness. We know what's going on. And one of the things that happens, as you said, like they're focusing on you, and typically that happens to a fault, right? So they're like, I'm going to do everything in my power to get in a position where I can shoot at the guy who's in the 2-story window. And so in order to get a good shot, they peek around a corner and they don't see me on the bottom floor looking right at him, blasting him with my AG. Well, what do you think is going to happen?
And in their defense, like it was definitely a situation we were putting them in kind of a catch-22, because they, if they looked up, they could shoot at me and you'd hit them. And if they didn't look up, then I'd hit them.
Yeah. And that's where you, again, like, it's a game of, you have, and we had limited respawns and they had unlimited respawns, just limited time. So you think, okay, well, you just need to throw yourself, and it's like the raid on Area 51. They can't shoot all of us. Well, in point of fact, they absolutely can shoot all of you, because it's not like there's millions. There's only like 15 or 19 or 20 of you.
Yeah, they can't shoot all of us ceased to be effective around when we stopped using muzzle loading firearms. And like, realistically, if it had been a team of 20 guys or 18 guys working together on the same radio frequency, operating fire teams with ideally someone actually in charge, because like that does help with teamwork, then yeah, I don't think realistically that we would have been able to hold them off for the entire time limit with infinite response. I mean, maybe, like, we do have days where we are really good, but like it's certainly vastly harder.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at a lot of the skirmish games that you see at airsoft fields, one of the big differentiating factors in success for a lot of game modes is how much coordination you have and communication you have with different teams. So if you look at like the D-Day Rush game that we do, typically the defenders will win that game because it's very hard crossing over open terrain when you have entrenched defenders. But if we look at the games where we have successfully won that game, I mean, yeah, you have the random one, which is that like, individual contributor who decides to run and then like runs in serpentine fashion and dodges all the BBs through some miracle and then touches the bunkers and wins or whatever. But the vast majority of times where we've had a more consistent win, let's call it, has been times where we have, as attackers, have coordinated fire and maneuver, right? With one team shooting fully automatic to keep the defenders' heads down while the other team moves up and they start shooting, and we sort of rinse repeat until you win, right?
Yeah, and it's sort of winning that game honestly is a matter of, in my view, getting a critical mass of shooters far enough up the field that the attacker's fire is effective at keeping heads down. Not at getting kills, just at keeping the opposing team unable to return fire.
Yeah, I remember one game that we had played years ago where Cal had basically divided the whole group into two teams, Team A and Team B. And he basically instructed everyone. He says, okay, when I say go, Team A, you're going to shoot fully automatic like hold the trigger down, spray the bunkers for like 3 full seconds, count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, while the other team moves up, and then we'll swap roles. And that was super effective. But again, I don't know how many players got tagged out, but that was hardly the point. People were just literally, especially the renters, loved it. Literally just spraying their AEGs with their high cap magazines wound up all the way for like 3 seconds, 4 seconds at a time. People keep their heads down because you can't. What are you going to do? Are you going to poke your head out when there's like 3,000 BBs coming in at you? Like, no, right?
Yeah, and I mean the answer there is that if you do that, you're going to get hit. It was the wrong answer. Like,
yeah, exactly.
I'm not sure what the right answer is, but that's the wrong one.
Yeah, just wait till it gets close enough and throw grenades over the walls. That's probably the best approach.
If you have them, totally, right? You know,
but
grenades into that nearest trench is definitely an all right play.
Yeah. So let me ask you, because I wanted to come back to this. So first, this was obviously your first game back in a long while. I mean, I don't think you had played since the last time you had played in the fall of the previous year.
Yeah, it would have been like last October or November.
Yeah. So how did it feel for you coming back to obviously a sport that is very familiar to you, no question. But how did it feel for you coming back to Airsoft, knowing that the people who you were going to be playing against have had a lot more practice recently than you have? Like, how did you internalize that?
So, I mean, in some ways, I'm a bad person to ask because, like, I don't care.
Okay.
In the sense that, like, it doesn't demotivate me. Like, the stuff that I found, I guess, like, mentally tough about coming back, you know, other than just, like...
Getting shot by your best bud in the first game? No, sorry.
I mean,
I'm not gloating.
Isn't that normal? Isn't that normal? That happens every time. No. I feel like, you know, for me, I'm not as fit as I want to be right now, and I'm working on that. But, like, Airsoft is definitely a place where I feel that a lot more than most of the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. You know, my ups and downs in fitness with HEMA are, you know, not as prevalent because I'm there every week, so they're not as noticeable. Mm-hmm. You know, but like, oh yeah, man, like, nope, cardio's not where it needs to be. Shit, got to work on that. Was definitely a big feeling. You know, going, oh yeah, a bunch of these players are going to be, you know, quote unquote, better than me. To be honest, I kind of took that for granted going in. And I honestly also found that, like, you know, I have kept up on doing ready ups. I have, especially because of the fact that I have a scope that I am not as familiar with. I've done a lot of, like, just ready ups to pop that up to get used to where it needs to land for eye relief. And I was really surprised at how effective that aspect of, like, trying to sort of, air quotes, keep my hand in was. Like, as a skill, I'm definitely, like, better there than I thought I'd be. There's less rust, and that's really cool.
I was hoping you'd say that because, I mean, we've always said for a long time, like, listen, you know what? You do these skills and they're meaningful, they matter. Like, doing them helps you. And I'm glad you got to experience that because, I mean, I've gotten a chance. I usually get to experience that the first game out, you know what I mean? At the start of the year in the same way. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's not as bad as I thought it was. And in the past, like, everyone took a break in winter. But now you got the indoor, and the indoor's going all year long. So you have people who literally play Airsoft here all year round. And indoor is not my thing. It's way too nerve-wracking, number one, because it's CQC insanity, basically, in a very, very small space. It's not like CQC at, like, Matt's Field in California, which is basically an outdoor field. It just happens to be in a warehouse, right?
It's an indoor-outdoor field.
Yeah, like, for us, it's a very small space, and it's not really my cup of tea. And so consequently, I just don't play in the winter. And you have guys who go and transition from the indoor to the outdoor. And so your first game out, you're like, boy, like, am I going to be able to keep up with these guys? And you realize, hey, actually, no, well, I mean, we've been doing this for a really long time, which is absolutely not an excuse to rest on your laurels, but you do have a foundation of skills that comes back to you and that muscle memory that you haven't lost. Sort of, you get to maintain all that. So I'm glad that you brought that up. The fitness thing is also interesting because, I mean, you know, Airsoft is, I would say, pretty unique in the types of fitness and explosive sort of cardio that you do. Like, there's not that many I guess there's not that many sports that are. I mean, a paintball, of course, is probably pretty similar. But like, if you look at other sports like basketball or volleyball,
We,
like,
weirdly, I think baseball is actually a decent comparison because it's sprinting,
yeah, that's probably true. Sprinting and then
right?
stopping and then just waiting
Yeah,
and then sprinting. Yeah, I mean
you know.
that's fair.
But I think you know the cardio aspect is just sort of like for me. I'm like, okay, I shouldn't be this tired at this point in the day. Like, it's not a matter of like, oh man, like I'm not fit enough to play a game of airsoft. It's a matter of, oh, 5 games of airsoft in. I'm like, man, I kind of want to break. And that shouldn't be the case. That should be like 15 games of airsoft in.
Thankfully, in your case, you have the resiliency
You know,
to just say, well, yes, I am tired. Yes, I shouldn't be this tired. But also, well, shag it. I'm just going to keep going anyway. Like, who cares?
yeah, well, I
right?
mean, like, as you know from running, right? Stubbornness is kind of what gets you through.
Yeah,
So
relentless forward motion.
yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Like, stubbornness and the awareness that if you stop, it will be harder to get going again.
Well, yeah. Hey, bye.
But the other thing, like the skill that I found funny that I was like, oh, wow, I suck at this a lot more than I did previously is definitely like they've rearranged some of the cover and like my ability to stick to it and make good use of it was not where it should be. And like, I think part of that's a mindset thing and part of it's a practice thing. But that's definitely rustier than I wanted it to be. But like in terms of the ready ups and stuff, like, there are folks we played with there who play, every week. We have guys who are on our team who, we played a zombies game where Phil and I were the guys who, if we hit the enemy teammates, team members, they join our team. And, I ended up, sort of dueling down a number of our teammates. And it was sort of like, yeah, okay, the ready ups definitely work. I'm not far behind them. And I'll absolutely acknowledge, the setup that I'm running is really good. Like I am extremely happy with the performance of the setup in the sense that if I put the targeting reticle on someone and pulled the trigger, they pretty much got hit. And, I did a bunch of like fairly long range shots during that game with an optic that wasn't dialed in quite right, but it was still very easy for me to go, okay, yeah, this is, like 150, 175 feet and go, yeah, I'm going to take 4 or 5 shots and that guy's going to call himself out. Like I can be comfortable saying that.
Yeah.
And that is, a good feeling from a mechanical, like, yeah, this is doing exactly what I want it to be doing sense, but it's also a good feeling from a gameplay sense to be like, all right, I started this game with one teammate who's gone off and is flanking and now I have 5 and
Yeah, you did all the work
right,
that game. I did basically nothing.
it's like, just like, all right, party on,
Yeah.
and like in at least one case, one of our teammates, I'm positive I caught him with his pants down, figuratively speaking. The magnified optic means that I know I didn't literally do it. But, in the sense that, he was further out of cover than he should be. And he didn't think I had the range to do what I did,
Yeah.
which was, just tap 2 shots off and hit him. And it's like, oh, I guess I'm on your team now, So, yeah, there's definitely like validity there. But yeah, I feel like, I need to work on the cover utilization. I need to do even more squats. I probably need to start like doing squats with my gear on actually, so that I'm getting more oomph out of them. Because the IIR and the backpack for the airline and the chest rig do weigh, a little bit. But I'm really happy with, for the amount of time in between games, my performance. And I'm also like, I had a huge amount of fun. And I am the sort of person who periodically needs to be reminded how much they enjoyed going out and doing the things they enjoy going and doing, as daft as that sounds.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because you can sort of get lost in it, especially for us, like where we do, have long breaks between play. and you focus on like teching and focusing on doing all these things that are airsoft adjacent. Even like for us, like I remember having conversations with Chris many years ago where he was like, I enjoy training just as much as I enjoy playing, and that's super cool, and it's a great mindset to have. And I do absolutely enjoy training just from the standpoint of like we get to hang out and do whatever, which is just, it's a laugh and a half. But playing is different, right? And
Yep,
so,
absolutely.
consequently, like when you go and play, you get a different experience, you get different stress, like there's different stakes. Even if you're not like, oh, well, I got to win or whatever, but like just the stakes of, oh, I don't want to get hit, or I don't want to let that team down, or I want to do my part or whatever, right?
Even if you're not going, oh, I have to win every game, like we play to win, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we played some games last weekend where, the ref who was actually Josh, so one of our team members, he was like, "Oh well, I want to make it hard on you guys. I want to make it unfair." I'm like, "Good, let's do it. Who cares? I don't care if we win. I want to have fun. I want to have a challenge, and that's fine, right?" And I don't think we.
Totally.
It was the three. So we did a 2-story defense, but it was only 3 attackers, and it was myself, Matt, and Stefan attacking against like 8 defenders or something like that, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Like, why would you have so many more defenders? But the reality was that there was the 3 of us, and we were good to go, and we were highly motivated, unlimited respawns, and we're going to use them well, and all this kind of stuff. And there were lots of renters and stuff like that. So he made a challenge. But great. Did we win that game? I don't think we did. I got in the building, but I don't think it counted. Like our job was to get all of them. Still though, great time, big challenge, and then that's exactly what exactly what we're looking for, right? I never, ever, ever, ever want to play a game and win it and not feel like we had to lift a finger, right?
Yeah,
like that's stupid. Like, why would you do that?
That's not the point, right?
Yeah.
We are there to play the game and to challenge ourselves. Like it's not about just like, especially pushing people over, right? Like if we're winning casually, air quotes, then like to me that's unsatisfying.
Totally. Like if we win casually, then the conversation has to be, okay, we need to switch up the teams because this is no good. And it's no good for us, but it's definitely no good for the other team who, is just getting murked. Like I remember one of the defense games that we played when you were there, like there were these renters, and they were coming around cover, and I had that piece of cover, I had it like locked down, and they would casually be walking around that piece of cover, and I'd be blasting them. I'm like, well, I'm not gonna just let you walk into our defensive area. Like, this is not gonna happen. But at the same time, like, you probably should not do that thing. Like they were all bunched up, and I threw a grenade, and I hit 5 of them. I'm like, sorry, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, this is just, I'm gonna play the best as I can. But at the same time, like after that, we're like, okay, well, we need to mix things up because I don't want to keep doing that all day, and nor do they, right?
Yeah, well, and like, at the end of the day, those 5 kids, they were younger players. They did have fun, but like
maybe not in that particular instance, however.
Yeah, sure, for sure. But like, I think as people who are, veterans of airsoft, like people who've been in the community for a really long time, we want the community to grow. So like, there's that matter of just like, yeah, okay, we need to split them up so that they're getting to play against each other. We need to not have all the experienced players just stomping on them. We need to make sure they have a good time. Mm-hmm. And like over the course of the day, I know I took time to like talk to them during games and like, just before games and, toss out advice and be like, yo, hey, move up. You're using a rental. It's not going to reach as far as you're hoping it's going to right now. And they took all of that constructive feedback really well, and they visibly got better at the game over the day. So like huge props to them. I don't have any real expectations that they're going to be listening to this, but if you're a new player and you are listening to this, like playing and learning while you play is definitely a viable way to get better at airsoft. And most veteran players, like if you're the sort of person, and I think we all are to some extent, going like, oh man, like people are judging me for a second. No, like we're cheering you on.
Yeah, definitely. I played over the weekend. There were two new players. One who it was their first game ever, and then someone else it was their second game at the outdoor, and they'd played a couple of games at the indoor. And nice. Steph and I took the two of those players on our team for most of the day. And so typically the way that we ran is like one of those guys would run with me and then the other person would run with Stefan, or, you know, vice versa or whatever. And there's one game in particular where we were attacking like the 2-story structure at the bottom through the village, like it was a quick team deathmatch or whatever. But I got behind the church, so on the left side of the building, I mean, there's like a church structure, and I could see into the back door of that building. You know what I'm talking about. And I saw that there was a player who ran from left to the right side of that doorway. Right, and there's nowhere for them to go. So what did I do? I started just shooting at the doorway constantly, like a constant stream of BBs, like quack, like thwack, 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 thwack. And I said to the new guy who was with me, I was like, okay, run up to that doorway and just mercy that guy with your rifle, because he won't be able to move. He's stuck there. There's nowhere for him to go. And so he's like,
that is going to be the last place he goes today.
Well, exactly. And so he looked hesitant. I'm like, no, I got this, dude. Just go up. So eventually he runs, and I got video of this. I may make a video with it later. But he runs up to the doorway, and when he gets there, I'm like, take him out. He's like, no, he says he wants to surrender. And I was like, oh, okay, then just let him out, I suppose. Like it was a very good experience, because then I yelled at him to get inside. I was like, get in cover, I'll come to you. And I ran in and I gave him a fist bump, like, way to go. And it turns out that as I was saying to him, I was like, I think I got everyone, but we just got to make sure, blah, blah. And the whistle blew. So that was the end of that. But like, it was a very good, like, feels good moment for the guy. 'Cause he was like, yeah, we did something good. Like, I ran that door, he had me covered, etc. Like, those are the kinds of experiences that make sure that the player has fun, which then means that they're more likely to come back. Now, it's unlikely that this guy is like, oh, I hate it, I'm not coming back, because we had conversations and I know he didn't feel that way. But those are the kinds of experiences that you can, as a veteran player, we talked about in a video and podcast in the past, but you can absolutely help create those experiences for people, right? And there's really no cost to doing that. Like, what did that cost me? Literally nothing. I needed a teammate to rush that door, and he did exactly what I was expecting.
You know, but there's a sensible piece there where it's like, well, as the veteran player, you know, like, you can provide that base of fire, arguably, I would say, with like more consistency and more, if you want to say fear factor, pucker factor,
yeah,
than the guy with the rental can. So if he's willing to push up, he's definitely the guy who should be doing it. But it also means that he gets to feel like the rock star because he's the guy doing it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so it's this cool combination of like, this is arguably what we want to do in terms of practical, effective play, but also it lets the new guy feel really good. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, and we've talked about in the past how, typically you don't want the renters being the one leading the charge. Like, you always want to lead the charge. You always want to be in front and all this kind of stuff, because if there's going to be danger, like, you should be the one exposing yourself to it first and all this kind of stuff, right? Just for a good experience of the renters. But in this case, it's not always going to be the case. And this is a good example of that, looking at that, being like, okay, who is the best person for the job in this case? And, you nailed it. It's like, do I have any confidence that he wouldn't been able to lay down a steady stream of fire in the way that would have kept that guy pinned in that position while I moved up? No. I don't think so, right? What likely would have happened if the roles were reversed is that he would have shot at the doorway largely ineffectively, and I would have run up, and the guy inside would have popped out and shot me, right?
Yeah. Whereas you can put the guy in a situation where, like, he can't poking his head out is a terrible idea.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but I mean, that's the kind of thing we talked about in the past, but it's a fun part, and it's good too. When you come back, even after a break or whatever, you're still able to do that, right? There's no, oh, well, I haven't played in a while, so people, I can't make fun for people. It's not a thing, right?
Yeah, no, I had a great time. I'm looking forward to this weekend, right? We're recording this on a Monday, and I'm, planning tinkering with airsoft stuff during the weeks that I can go play. Gotta dial that scope in.
Totally. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. Glad we're back after a little bit of a break. We have more podcasts for you coming in the future. But until then, that's all we've got for you. If you want to join the Discord, the link is in the description below. We have new people joining the community almost every single day, and we'd love to have you join. But until then, that's all we have for you this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of Pat Gribbles about how much he loves his new HBA setup. Tune in next week for probably more.
Yeah. See ya.
Cheers.